You're standing at the time when the Earth was first formed. There's no name for the oceans yet. No continents, no sky, no blue to speak of. Just a whirling ball of molten rock trying to remember who it was supposed to be. Gravity is still tightening its grip. The moon hasn't even properly moved in yet. It's pacing around the edges, unsure whether it's joining the dance or starting a new one. The air is thick with vapor, and the ground crackles with heat. Beneath your feet, the planet isn't still. It's breathing fire and molten metal. You can feel it, not just hear it. The thrum beneath the crust is steady, primal. That's the Earth's first heartbeat, and it's irregular. Not because of illness, but because it's not alone. The moon finally enters, not gently. No, it slams into place. Most believe it came from a collision. Theia, a Mars-sized protoplanet, brushed too close. The result? Earth gains a scar and a companion. The moon is born from the rubble, and it circles the young planet like a cautious sibling, tugging at it even before oceans exist. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan, and listen to some soothing music, and we'll get started tonight. The first ocean forms when the rain comes. It pours for millions of years, not metaphorically, literally, a planet-wide monsoon. Steam from the molten Earth condenses in the upper atmosphere, cools, and crashes back down. The land drowns. Pools merge into lakes. Lakes merge into seas. And then one day, almost casually, the seas stretch wide and say, "I'm ocean," but ocean is restless, not because of wind or depth, but because the moon, now fully committed to its eternal orbit, has started to tug. The tug is weak at first, but persistent. Imagine fingers softly pulling a blanket, then pulling again, then again. That's the start of tides, gentle bulges in the water, traveling with the moon, following it like loyal pets. Wherever the moon goes, water leans. But what's water leaning toward, really? What is it obeying? Gravity, a quiet, invisible rule that binds lovers, moons, and microbes alike. In this early epoch, tides are different from today. Earth is spinning faster. A full day lasts only 6 to 8 hours. The moon is closer, looming 3 times larger in the sky. That means stronger tides, faster swings, and more dramatic shorelines. Imagine being there. Oceans rising and falling violently every few hours. No subtle ebb and flow, just boiling chaos on a planetary scale. The land, what little there is reshaped constantly. Cliff faces crumble, basins are carved. Sediment flows in, then out, then in again. This isn't erosion, it's sculpting. The moon and Earth aren't destroying each other. They're collaborating, even flirting. Together, they carve the crust, stretch the plates, create fault lines, and lay the groundwork for tectonic motion. You feel the earth slow, not metaphorically, physically. Tidal friction, that is, the rubbing between water and land, acts like a brake pad. Every wave that crashes, every tide that rushes in and out, steals a little momentum from Earth's rotation. A second here, a second there. Billions of years later, we've added hours to our days thanks to this cosmic drag. How do tides form? They form because of this ancient push and pull, this gravitational duet that began before life, before breath, before names. How do they affect the earth? They slow its spin, they lubricate its crust, they keep its core warm. They stretch the skin of the planet like a massage from the moon. Let's talk about that core warmth. Here's something odd. Tidal forces don't just raise and lower oceans. They squeeze the entire earth, ever so slightly, like a stress ball in the hand of the moon. This squeezing, called tidal heating, stirs the molten metals inside the core, keeping convection active and the magnetic field alive. Yes, you heard right. Without tides, your compass wouldn't work, your GPS might crash, birds wouldn't migrate correctly. Solar radiation would roast our skin like open rotisserie. So tides don't just move water, they protect us. They are, in a way, guardians of life. Speaking of life, we are almost at the edge of it. The stage is now set. We have oceans, we have tides, we have coastlines that disappear and reappear every few hours. And somewhere in the shallows, in pools warmed by volcanic heat, tiny chains of molecules are getting sticky. They cling, divide, adapt. Tides create the first rhythmic environment on Earth. A chemical is more likely to bump into another chemical in a tide pool than in the vast, still middle of the ocean. And every time the tide leaves, water evaporates, concentrating ingredients. Every time it returns, it stirs the soup. It's a primordial recipe book, written not by gods, but by gravity and luck. The first cells didn't just need water, they needed tides. Pause. You stand at a rocky coast. 3.5 billion years ago, the tide has just gone out. You're looking at a puddle of warm, salty water glinting under a toxic sky. You lean down. There's movement. No, not a fish. Nothing with eyes, but bubbles, a shimmer of protein, a flicker of intent. That's life beginning to respond to the rhythm. And here's the quiet secret. It never stopped. Life will always respond to rhythm. Now fast forward 1 billion years. Life gets good at dancing to the tide. You see mats of blue-green bacteria, cyanobacteria, growing in intertidal zones. They bask when the water leaves, photosynthesizing wildly, then rest as the tide returns. Some of these bacteria even time their reproductive cycles to the tides. Not the sun, not the wind, the moon. Symbiosis of tides with bacteria? Confirmed. And the Earth itself responds in kind. The tidal motion distributes heat across latitudes, circulates oxygen, and guides sediment. These bacteria, they oxygenate the planet, and we owe it to the tide. Later, multicellular life crawls out, not on a grand mission, just chasing food left behind by receding waters. Imagine a blob with no spine, no ambition, flopping toward a stranded shrimp. It wriggles, eats, then tide returns, blob retreats, it repeats, and then, one day, the blob stays longer, builds a shell, digs in, survives between tides. The first creature to live on land isn't a bold explorer. It's a hungry opportunist learning the rhythm of the moon. How do tides control us? In this case, they pulled us out of the sea. Quite literally. Even today, scientists can't stop staring at tide charts. Not just for shipping, for clues. Clues to early Earth rotation, Moon-Earth distance, even continental drift timelines. Fossils in tidal flats, called tidalites, record how often the tides came and went in prehistoric times. Each ripple is like a tick of a watery clock. So, who has studied tides? Everyone who ever studied time. And if you look at a sandstone ripple 1.4 billion years old, you're not just seeing geology. You're seeing a story written in two languages, rock and rhythm. You may not feel the moon pulling on you right now, but it is. Every part of your body, especially the fluid parts, responds. One study found humans sleep slightly less deeply during full moons. Another found the healing of certain wounds slowed when tides were high. Are we made of water? Yes. But more than that, we are made of motion. We're not stable statues. We're liquid rhythm, disguised in skin and bone. You started this journey as molten stone. You've arrived now, at the edge of life. And the tide is still calling you forward. The tide is low. You're standing on cracked, silty ground that was underwater just an hour ago. The water has retreated like a curtain at intermission, revealing a muddy stage. Seaweed glistens, crabs scurry, their tiny feet tapping out Morse code across slick stones. In shallow pools, creatures blink through glassy surfaces, not frightened, not excited, just waiting because it always comes back. That's the lesson the tide teaches first. Everything returns. But not everything stays the same. This is the place where life began to stretch. Not just its limbs. It didn't have limbs yet, but its possibilities. Life in the ocean was a swaying, drifting business. Currents moved food. Light streamed down in gold ribbons. Danger approached in waves. You didn't need legs when the sea moved for you. But here, in these tidal flats, where water came and went twice a day, you needed to think differently. When the tide left, the water shrank into puddles. Salinity rose, oxygen dropped, the game changed, and life, ever stubborn, adapted. How do tides affect biology? Start here, with the pressure to evolve. Let's talk about a creature that didn't have a name but had a plan. It lived in the mud, flattened like a pancake with gills. When the tide came in, it filtered plankton. When the tide went out, it burrowed down and hoped for the best. One day, instead of burrowing, it wriggled. It found another puddle. That decision, to move instead of hide, changed everything. Muscle strength developed, nervous systems fine-tuned, eyes began facing forward. This is the secret of tidal life. It's not always about surviving the high tide. Sometimes it's about chasing the low. You learn to move before you're ready. Millions of years later, you get to tectonic. Yes, it's got a name now. Found in Canada in 2004. Half fish, half lizard. It had fins with wrists. It lived in shallow tidal rivers. It used its proto-limbs to push itself up, gulping air in oxygen-poor water. Some days the tide didn't come back fast enough. It had to wait or crawl. Tectonic is your great-great-great-grandparent, and it was a tide walker. So again, who controls us? The tide does, the moon does. They made your hands possible. Let's zoom out. Entire ecosystems are dictated by tides. Coral reefs, mangrove forests, estuaries. They don't just live with the tide. They depend on its rhythm to breathe, eat, reproduce. Mangroves, they only drop their seeds when the tide is right, too early, and the seed floats out to sea and dies. Too late, it rots in place. The tide becomes a womb. Sea turtles, they return to beaches they hatched on, but only at night, and only during certain tide levels. Otherwise, predators win. Oysters, they filter feed based on tidal pulses. No tide, no dinner. So when you eat seafood, you're eating a history of rhythm. The moon fed you, and you didn't even say thank you. Let's dive smaller, back to bacteria. In the intertidal zone, where the water rises and falls predictably, bacteria form dense biofilms. These are living carpets, like slimy throw rugs of intelligence. They adapt to tidal exposure. They absorb nutrients when submerged. Then, when the water recedes, they switch metabolism and begin gas exchange with the air. Symbiosis of tides with bacteria? It's not a metaphor. It's daily life. And guess what? These bacteria pass on gene expression patterns to future generations, meaning the memory of the tide gets encoded in DNA. Let's surface again. Now we're in the Cambrian. Life explodes. Not literally, although it's close. Evolution gets dramatic. Animals develop eyes, teeth, armor, and legs. But the real story isn't the sudden appearance. It's the timing. The Cambrian seas were heavily influenced by tidal stirring. More nutrients circulated, more sunlight reached new zones. more ecological niches opened up. This wasn't just a spontaneous bloom, it was a tide-assisted event. Without those constant water movements, much of that early biodiversity might have stagnated. So how do tides influence evolution? They don't push, they invite, they open doors that wouldn't otherwise exist. Now picture a coastline, any coastline. Draw it in your mind. Got it? Now erase it. Because coastlines are temporary, the tide makes and unmakes them every hour. And over geological time, tides shape entire geographies. Fjords, deltas, lagoons, barrier islands. In Bangladesh, for example, tides sculpt the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest. It's a living labyrinth, formed by water that breathes in and out. People there live with the tides, timing fishing, walking paths, even weddings based on the moon's pull. How do tides influence geography? They don't just draw the map, they redraw it. Let's go back to your legs. You've forgotten how strange they are. You walk on land, you balance, you chase buses. But your body is a blueprint written in water. A design meant first for floating. Every tendon and vertebra evolved because some ancestor once flopped in the tide. Even now, human embryos develop gill slits before they develop lungs. Your body remembers the ocean. Your genes remember the moon. That memory is ancient, intimate, invisible. And it plays out every time you sigh, stretch, or sleep. Let's leave biology for just a moment. Let's talk about time. The moon, of course, is our original clock. Lunar months, tidal days, spring tides, neap tides. All these gave early humans something to measure against. Long before gears and bells and sand, there were tidal pools. You didn't need a sundial. You just needed to know when the fish would return. That's how humans first organized themselves, around the sea's timing. And eventually, that grew into calendars, into rituals, into civilization. Tides didn't just help us survive, they helped us remember. You're still standing there, on that muddy coast. The tide is rising now. The water creeps up silently, reclaiming what it left behind. Crabs vanish into crevices. The seaweed begins to sway again. That glimmering puddle becomes a pool, a stream, then a sheet of silver light. Everything is wet again. Everything is new. That's the final lesson of the tide. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't warn. It just returns, and somehow, that return heals what it took. When the moon wrote DNA, you wake inside a memory, not yours, not human, older. It smells of salt. The air is thick with spores and ancient rot. You lie flat against something soft and living, half submerged in warm tidal water. And something inside you stirs, because you are not yourself. You are life, small, primitive, barely beyond the soup, You were born in the tide pools, not just by them, not near them, in them. The sea left you behind in a rocky hollow, and the sun fed you. The water receded, but not all the way. You had just enough light, enough heat, enough minerals to tinker with replication. And then again and again, until something learned to remember itself. The tide was your first clock. It told you when to expect change, when to rest, when to move. It shaped your first circadian rhythm before time had a name. Now fast forward. You're no longer soup, you've grown fins, or claws, or fronds. Your lineage has spread. Some of you crawl landward between tides, learning lungs. Others stay and synchronize spawning to the full moon. Others learn camouflage to match the wet-dry, light-dark of intertidal zones. This is evolution by rhythm. It's not random, not chaotic. It's a dance, choreographed by the moon. And it leaves fingerprints not just in form, but in behavior, in instinct, in hormones. You see it in Grunion, the fish that leap onto shore only at the exact high tide, following a full moon. They lay eggs in the sand, time to hatch just as the next wave returns. You see it in Palolo worms, erupting from coral reefs during specific lunar phases. You see it in corals themselves, orchestrating synchronized mass spawning across miles of ocean on a single moonlit night. Even now, you're ruled by it. You wake and sleep. Yes. But beyond the circadian is the circatidal, a roughly 12.4-hour cycle buried in your genes, faint but traceable. It governs some shellfish precisely, muscles that open and close their valves not just with day and night, but with the moon's dance. And then comes the more mysterious, the circalunar. Monthly rhythms, menstruation, perhaps behavioral shifts, not superstition, but biological inheritance from a time when you still bled with the tides. You are a tide pool animal in a skyscraper body, still looking at your watch, still wondering why you feel strange at the full moon. And that's not just biology, it's culture. The human moon. You lift your eyes again to the moon, this time from a firelit cave. Your name is forgotten, but you are early, Homo sapiens. You have teeth, tools, and questions, and you are watching the tides with awe and fear. You do not yet call it gravity. You call it God, or fate, or breath. The sea comes, the sea leaves. You believe it chooses to do so. So you worship it. In Mesopotamia, moon gods become tide gods. In Polynesia, lunar calendars guide voyages across terrifying distances. In India, Vedic hymns speak of Soma and the tide, linking ritual and water like lungs to air. Tide is not just natural, it's holy, even when agriculture tames some parts of the world. Fishermen still pray to the tide. Women time their fertility rites to it. Entire civilizations build flood calendars around lunar phases. And you? You carry this in your blood, even now. Because before you measured months with paper, you counted full moons. You planted when tides were right. You birthed by the pull of something you could not see but deeply felt. The science wakes, you shift again, forward, yet sideways, into the early minds of scientists. Not philosophers or priests now, but men and women with brass instruments and heavy notebooks. The tides, once feared and worshipped, are now measured. In 1687, Newton lifts a curtain. Gravity, a force invisible yet omnipresent. He proves what ancient sailors had only intuited, that the moon pulls the sea the way a mother draws in her child. He writes it out plainly, and the world changes. Now the tides have math, but don't mistake math for coldness. These calculations are music, notations of a grander song, played not with strings but with spheres. You stand at the edge of the ocean holding a tide table, and it feels like holding sheet music for the planet's breath. It is predictability, yes, but also awe. In the 19th century, cities like London, Boston, and Tokyo begin to record the tides like they would record rainfall or temperature. Observatories sprout up like lighthouses, not for warning ships, but for tracking the pulse. A few realize something profound. If you can chart the tides, you can predict future coastlines, you can protect harbors, you can time commerce, you can win wars, and someone always wants to win a war. The D-Day landings, June 6th, 1944, do not happen at random. They are scheduled between tides, in the narrowest of windows. The moon plays a quiet role in history, choosing when 1,000 ships will scrape against Normandy. The sea does not know it, but it decides the fate of nations. Still, for all its strategic value, the tide never stops being poetic. Tides in the mind, you wander now through poetry, not battlefield sand, through Whitman's lines, through Bashaw's haiku, through the quiet dripping of ink from countless writers who found themselves hypnotized by the rising sea. The tide doesn't ask to be written about. It just arrives and leaves and returns, and the human heart mirrors it. Longing in time. You think of lovers separated by distance, but bound by rhythm. I'll meet you at high tide. You think of funeral songs set to the ocean's sigh. You think of lullabies hummed by coastal mothers who teach their babies to breathe like the sea. In, out, no panic, no rush. You realize, standing there on the shore of thought, that the tide is not a thing, it is a teacher. It teaches patience, because nothing ever stays. It teaches return, because what is gone can come back. And it teaches humility, because you cannot command the sea. You've been following this rhythm all your life, even when you didn't know it. Your creativity swells and fades. Your moods rise and crash. Even your body, yes, especially your body, obeys this soft dictatorship. And the animals, oh, they follow too. In the next moment, you find yourself deep in a mangrove or floating above a reef. You watch as crabs perform clockwork migrations across the sand, perfectly timed to lunar pull. You see sea turtles lay eggs on beaches just after high tide, trusting the moon to guard their nests with distance. You see Grunion, silver fish, flopping on the shore only on certain nights, as if kissing the earth goodnight. They don't know calendars, they know timing, and you wonder what you've forgotten. You wake up to a storm, but not the kind you hear, not wind, not thunder. This one is quieter, slower. You don't notice it at first, but it's already there, crawling through your bones. It started hours ago, far above your head, when the sun sneezed a coronal mass ejection toward Earth. Now, the storm is here, tapping on the edges of the magnetic field like invisible fingers on a drum. But you don't see any of that. You're standing on a rocky coastline instead, barefoot again. It's dusk. The tide's pulling away, farther than usual. The horizon is swollen, dark, and slow. You sense something coming, not in the air, but in the water. This is where the tides become more than movement. This is where they become messages. You've wandered through the birth of tides, the dance of moons, the rhythm of evolution. Now comes the echo, the human echo. Part 4 isn't just about tides as they are, but how they pull us, shape us, and become tools we've tried to hold in our palms. Some fail, some succeeded, some are still waiting to be understood. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan, and listen to some soothing music. And we'll get started tonight. You begin walking down that shore. You feel the crunch of sea salt drying on your ankles. Something shifts in your blood. Not metaphorically and literally. You're water. And that water answers to the moon. You're not separate from tides. You are a tide, just folded differently. There are cities that grew from the pulse of the ocean, harbors perfectly nestled in the arms of tidal rivers. Their foundations laid where the sea licks the land just right. London, New York, Tokyo, without tides, without that predictable inhaling and exhaling. These cities might never have become more than sleepy fishing villages. And so began a quiet arms race, not for land, but for timing. To know when the tide comes in is to know when to launch ships, when to fish, when to defend, when to flee. Tides as tools of war. The Romans knew. Julius Caesar timed the invasion of Britain by watching tidal flows in the English Channel. He didn't understand tides. No one truly did back then. But he watched them, knew when the shores hardened for marching, when the sea retreated long enough to land men and horses. The British were baffled. Why attack then? Why now? They didn't know the tide whispered secrets to Caesar. But it wasn't just him. The Allies, centuries later, would launch the Normandy invasion with tidal tables in hand. D-Day was scheduled for June 5th, 1944. But a storm delayed them. General Eisenhower waited for a specific tide, low enough to reveal German beach defenses, but not too low, that boats ran aground. It had to coincide with moonlight, but not too much moonlight. The fate of Europe turned on millimeters of water. You shiver. This is where tides aren't just natural, they're tactical. You think about other invasions, Napoleon failing to cross the English Channel, the Mongols watching fleets destroyed by typhoons. Were the tides angry then? Or just misunderstood? Some modern submarines, drifting silently beneath waves, still obey tide charts. Why? Because even silence has a rhythm, and water remembers everything. Two, tides and bacteria, the oldest partnership. Zoom in now, smaller still, until your eye fits inside a droplet of seawater. There, look, a thin, wavy bacterium swims upward, spiraling toward light. It's Vibrio fischeri, a luminous microbe that glows when in dense groups. In the deep sea, it partners with squids. The squid shelters it. The bacteria light its belly. This trick hides the squid's shadow from predators lurking below. But the timing is key. Every night, squids come up from the deep to feed. On tidal rhythms, their bodies shift according to the moon's pull. So the bacteria inside them, yes, even them, sync up together. Bacteria and squid live by the tide. It's not cooperation. It's choreography, and it's old bacteria, far older than squids or humans, have lived by tidal cycles for billions of years. Some change shape as salinity fluctuates. Some hide in rock crevices when tides retreat. Others become spores, frozen in time, waiting for the kiss of water's return. This isn't just survival, it's memory. You wonder, do bacteria remember the tides of ancient oceans, when there were 3 moons instead of 1? Do they carry that music in their genes? Is the tide inside you also microbial? 3. Culture by the shoreline. You sit now in a village made of wind-polished driftwood and fishbone fences, somewhere near the Indian Ocean. Maybe the people here rise with the tide. Literally, their homes stand on stilts, not from fear of drowning, but respect. Every full moon, the village holds a ceremony. They lay offerings at the edge of the retreating tide, candles, shells, salt. No one speaks for 3 hours. Then, as the water returns, children shout and jump waves. You watch, barefoot in the dark, heart thumping with the incoming surf. Culture is tide. Songs about moonlit fishing, myths of sea gods who inhale and exhale the oceans. Stories passed down not by words, but by timing. Fish when the birds call at low tide. Mourn when the waves rise and don't fall. Some languages don't have a word for ocean, they say. Instead, the moving water that listens. Urban tides, how cities, forgot now, walk into a subway station in Seoul. It's sleek, fast, automated. The tide is gone here, buried under concrete and speed. But is it really gone outside, along the Han River? Tidal parks rise and fall each day. Carefully designed stairs become invisible when the tide rises. Runners disappear under bridges. Couples shift picnic blankets by instinct. Some cities want their tides back. In the Netherlands, engineers have begun rewilding tidal plains, not just for nature, but for memory. To remind people that their ancestors watched these waters to plant crops, to set festivals, to whisper the seasons. You can't kill the tide. You can only forget it. But even then, it remembers you. V. The final pull, your phone buzzes. A tide chart app you forgot you downloaded flashes. Next high tide, 1:43 a.m. Lunar phase, waning gibbous, gravitational anomaly, moderate. You laugh. What does that even mean? But still, something in your chest tightens. You feel the pull you always have. The modern world loves to measure everything, but it doesn't know why we feel what we feel. Why you sometimes wake in the middle of the night, pulse slow, dreaming of salt and dark water. Why sleep hits harder at new moons. Why grief feels heavier near the equinox. They say it's nonsense, but you know better. You've walked with tides now, slept beside them, fought wars under their breath. You're not a bystander. You are a ripple. You wonder what it means when we say the sea has memory. But then, think about it. How else do you explain its rhythm? The tides always come back. Always. The moon pulls, the earth leans, and the waters obey in this ancient ballet. There's something primal about it. Like a heartbeat, persistent, pulsing through generations. You imagine yourself beside a coastal fishing village. Just before dawn, nets are coiled like sleeping serpents on the beach. The stars still hang above, but the water is already receding, quietly, dutifully, as if the ocean knows its role in the village's ritual. For centuries, these people have lived by the tide's clock. They knew it long before any satellite tracked it. You kneel and touch the moist sand, and it's like touching a page from the planet's diary. Further up the coast, you meet an old man with skin weathered like driftwood. He doesn't use a wristwatch. Instead, he watches the moon and feels the wind in his bones. He tells you that once, his father taught him how to read the tides. You don't need numbers, he says, tapping his chest. You just need rhythm. You listen, and you believe him. In a nearby temple carved into the cliffs, you see shell offerings arranged in spirals, symbols of lunar reverence, offerings to the force that pulls the sea and sometimes your heart. Tides, it seems, have become more than a physical force. They've become a metaphor for patience, for return, for surrender to the cycle. Across the world, you witness festivals held not on fixed dates, but on full moons and spring tides. In the mangrove deltas of Southeast Asia, children dance barefoot in waterlogged rice fields, their laughter echoing off brackish water. Elders know the best fishing days by scent and soil. The community is bound not by streets or screens, but by saline pulses that sweep through their days and dreams alike. Then, you trace it forward to the cultures that tried to use the tide. Naval empires, smugglers, warriors who launched attacks when the tide favored them, and to those who failed because they misunderstood the moon's grip. The water does not yield to steel or pride. It responds only to gravity and time. A weapon if you understand it, a trap if you don't. In science labs, you find blueprints of tidal energy turbines. Engineers speak in volts and torque, trying to tame the force you've walked beside all this time. And it's noble in its way, but you can't help smiling. The sea isn't something to be tamed. It's something to be respected. You don't break a rhythm. You dance to it. Eventually, your path leads you inland, where the memory of tides becomes metaphor, appearing in language, music, dreams. Poets call it longing. Doctors call it circadian rhythm. Farmers call it planting season. Lovers call it coming back. And you, perhaps, will simply call it the tide.